Well, a very good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen, dear hearts and gentle people, and a very warm welcome to this edition of the Bardi Interviews. I'm John Florance, and let's meet our interviewee for this evening, Rob Calow. Rob, good evening to you.
I'm here. Good evening, John.
Hello, nice to see you, nice to see you. And there you are on the screen in a photograph, playing what I assume is the largest of the clarinet family.
Not quite. Yes, that's the B-flat bass clarinet, that pitch is one octave lower than the normal B-flat clarinet. But yes, it's good if you play the clarinet. You can be quite versatile because there are I know of two clarinets bigger than that: the E-flat contralto and the B-flat contrabass. That's so big it's normally made out of metal. But you can go the other way, and you've got the little baby squeaky E-flat clarinet and things. And as a clarinettist, it gives you the chance to be very versatile, which you perhaps can't be with any other instrument in the wind section as much.
It also makes you very strong having to carry them all around, I dare say.
It does, yes. The case that the E-flat contralto belongs to for Leicestershire Arts is huge, and you need very strong arms.
Was the clarinet the first instrument you hit upon?
It was indeed. I played the recorder at Thurnby Lodge Junior School. Not surprising, a lot of this might be we, because we were together there, David and I. And I think we both played the recorder. And then to Gateway Boys Grammar School after the 11 plus. And they only ever had a band. There were never any string instruments. And they were all there. And it seemed logical to me that if the instrument was held like this, like a recorder, then a clarinet would make sense. And I've never played another instrument since, and David has never played the clarinet, and I've never played the flute. And it was very good at Gateway. We had two exceptionally talented players in the sixth form that really inspired us to, I want to do this, take it up.
Well, the clarinet has had some wonderful music written for it.
It has. We are the new kids on the block, John. A mere 300 years.
Do you come from a musical background? Is your family musical?
I really like Adam Summerhay's answer to you there. It's no, but yes. I think that's the right way round. We don't have, there's the gang, of course, there they all are. We were surrounded by music growing up, particularly choral at church and things like that, but nobody had done it professionally until my son took up the tuba and went to music college. But we were surrounded by music all the time, singing in churches. The first concert we were taken to, David and I, by Mum and Dad, was Mantovani and his orchestra in 1967 in De Montfort Hall. And therefore you sing a live symphony orchestra. But I think importantly, he didn't just play light classical music, he played film music and musicals. And that, I think, that early on really made an impression.
I mean, Mantovani and his orchestra has sort of slipped down the plug hole of the memory, rather. But he was a huge star in his day, wasn't he? He was on the television all the time.
He was.
And, he was in the top 10, wasn't he?
He was, and he had his own BBC television programme, which you could watch. And that was the right mix. And I think he was the first person to mix the music styles that you could hear. From the 50s and 60s, film music, songs from musicals, as well as lighter classical music as well.
The Cascading Strings.
Indeed, by Mr. Ronald Binge.
Yes. So Mantovani was the first real live orchestra that you saw there?
That's correct, yes. In De Montfort Hall.
And what your home background, you say that you had music, but no one played an instrument then?
Not in immediate family. Well, I did actually get out of Dad once that he played the sousaphone in the RAF band, but he never really said any more about that, and I never really took. Our grandfather Jack Calow had learnt to play the piano for church services, and my mum's dad, Grandpa Smith, self-taught mandolin player.
So there was some music in the Calow DNA.
We were surrounded by music, but we were the first to properly take up a musical instrument because we had the chance to do it.
Well, you say you had the chance, and that's because of the wonderful Leicestershire music education scheme.
Yes. Oh, look, there's two little twins. Yes, we were. That's right. I mean, in the 1970s, it was totally free. Saturday mornings, a wonderful thing to be involved with.
So enlightened, and such a pity that that has really largely gone.
A lot of
Because
people
in
are
its
fighting
day,
very hard.
it put Leicestershire on the map, really, in the musical
did.
world, didn't it?
With Tippett, Previn. You can
Yeah.
find on YouTube Previn conducting the LSSO. Very
Extraordinary.
high standard, as it was when our children played in it. And a lot of people are fighting. Hopefully the Bardi do help to keep it going, which is wonderful.
And you mentioned the picture, those two winsome twins.
That's right.
There. What's that? What's
There's
that
about
phone?
6 of these photographs. My mother delights in getting out to show people. I drew the line at the one of David and myself sitting back with our backs to you on the potties. That went on our 50th birthday cake.
What's the boat, though?
Well, so that shows the fact that we were dressed the same. We were about 7 here, I think, 1967. The model is a plastic kit, and that Dad made lots of models with us, and that started us off something which we still do today, make models of all sorts. Mrs. Calow's will both tell you we've got too many models in our house, I think. But that's one of the rather strange things Dave and I are interested in, Trinity House light vessels. And a lot of people we have asked when they've gone around the world to take photographs of the light ships all around the world. And we collect, yes, we are very interested in Trinity House light ships.
You are Leicester born and bred.
I am.
And you've lived in Leicester all your life, really,
That's
apart
correct.
from a few years away.
Yeah.
But this, I think, is a picture. This is your back.
This is out of David and my back bedroom window. This is a very important day, and it's very important to show if you wake up in the morning and go to bed with a steam train like that on an embankment, and that's your bedroom window, then it's not surprised that you like steam trains. I'm a very minor shareholder of the Great Central Railway. That is the Skeggy line from Leicester Belgrave Road to Skeggy. And in the summer, right up to, I think, 1962, thousands of people would go on this railway line. Just to the right, off to the picture, about half a mile, is Thurmby and Scraptoft Station. And then if you go to the left, you end up going down under Uppingham Road and past Humberston Park and end up at Belgrave Road. Sadly, this is an important picture because it's February the 5th, 1965, and that is the very last ever train, because what you can't see on the picture on the right there is a crane ripping up the track. Oh. So this is the last train, which is why Dad took the photograph.
This is
but as you can imagine,
picture.
Afterwards, what a fantastic place to play, the rally bank, as we all called it. In the end, they demolished the bridge because it's incredibly dangerous and very high. So they took the bridge down. But what an amazing view to have out your bedroom window, John.
And the clickety-clack,
it was
a sense of rhythm in you.
Yes, and it was just off to the left, there was a wonderful yellow Great Northern somersault signal that would go down, and then you knew the train was coming.
Now, you said you were in the Gateway School Band. This is back, what, in the late 1970s?
Well, that's right. So Gateway Boys, we went in 1972, and we went because Gateway was what was called the Art Grammar School. And as opposed to Wiggy Boys, where they always were Latin, and there was Aldermoot Boys and City Boys. But Gateway was the Art Grammar School. And once we got into the business of graphic design in Leicester, it became very obvious that everybody went to Gateway. The people that ran the design agencies went to Gateway. That picture's taken in 77. And I can tell you it's 77 because there's ladies in that band. The last of our 5 years in the first year was when Gateway accepted ladies.
And that's you at the back on the left, is it?
So you've got David Edwards, our music teacher at Gateway, wonderful man.
Yeah.
We went to Beecham. Just to his left is me with lots of hair.
Right. Okay. Yes.
And David is on the far left.
Yeah.
Again with lots of hair.
Yeah. I couldn't quite see the instruments you were playing. I got confused between two of you.
Yeah. And you can see George Baker on the tuba. He conducted the senior concert band. There's some quite interesting people on there. Paul Dovey's in the centre on the trumpet at the back. Paul plays in the Rutland and in Bardi Wind still. The chap with the cymbal bass drum at the back is Mark Cartwright. He's a professional opera singer. So yes, it's fascinating where we've all ended up really, but that's 1977.
No strings.
No strings. We never had any strings. It was always a wind band, which I suppose answers the thing about why Bardi Wind and all that.
Now we're building up to your first choice of music for this evening. And I'm not giving anything away too early by saying it's a Wagner.
It's
And
Wagner.
Wagner, well, they're all favourite pieces of music of yours, but
Yeah.
this in particular has special meaning for you. What we're going to hear is an excerpt from his great comic opera, The Mastersingers of Nuremberg.
Yeah, I wanted to say at the beginning that to choose 8 pieces of music is impossible. Yes. I think I wanted 24 at least. Of varying. So 8 has been really difficult. And if I'm having Wagner, which I must for the 2 reasons we're going to discuss, then sadly we can't have the end of Bruckner's 5th Symphony. We certainly can't have the end of Mahler's 2nd, which should be there, but it's difficult. This was the very first piece that David Edwards, our music teacher at Gateway, put on the record player to start our music O-level seriously. We learned 6 pieces of music from the different musical periods, and this was the big romantic piece, and I was just blown away. I mean, what an amazing piece of music this is, and I'm quite happy to sit through 5 hours of Wagner every day if you put me in front of it, whatever.
Well, we're of a mind there. I mean,
Yeah.
Not everyone is, but I particularly love the Mastersingers.
The thing about the Mastersingers, it has everything, John, doesn't it? It has love,
there's a melancholy about
sadness,
it as well,
melancholy,
and
huge happiness, and at the end, it's wonderful. That's amazing.
It's a wonderful piece. But we should say that this piece of music that we're going to hear has a special, well, it has a kind of sentimental value for us.
Yes, let's have a listen to it, and I'll tell you afterwards because of the picture.
Let's hear then something from just an extract, a small snippet, a bleeding chunk, if you like, of Wagner's The Mastersingers. Silencio, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But how can such a ghastly individual write such wonderful music like that?
That is one of life's amazing questions, isn't it?
We won't pursue it. But as I said, that music or music from the Mastersingers has a special meaning for you.
Well, it does, because I mean, the most astute of you listening to that will realise straight away that is not the prelude to Die Meistersinger. And that's why I asked Alan to find that cue 3 hours, 49 minutes and 42 seconds into the opera. This is in Act 3 when the Mastersingers arrive on the scene in the big festival at the end before the prize song is sung. And that piece of music and the length of it fitted exactly so that Miss Dawkins could walk down the aisle of the church to get married to me on October the 4th, 1986. So it has a very, very important part in our lives. We both went to the church. It has a lovely long nave, and we had a little tape recorder, and we played it. I played it, and she practiced walking up and down, so it fitted in. It, however, needed her to wait for the first 26 bars, and then it goes with the march part. So, however, the verger tried to go first. So the vicar grabs his collar, and you can clearly see this on the video we have, to stop him walking. But there we are. Yes, I had hair in those days, and my wife looks wonderful, doesn't she?
It's a wonderful picture, I must say.
Just a short little story is the hat.
Yes.
The very clever Miss Dawkins didn't tell Mr. Calow about the hat. We got to say, well, here's the veil business. And of course, I was very good and didn't look behind me. So I turned to look at my gorgeous wife-to-be and was dumbfounded to see a hat with a veil. And being a hopeless man, what the hell do I do with this? So it had to be pulled carefully over the top. It's a wonderful Edwardian dress. It was beautiful.
Absolutely beautiful. Wagner and brings back memories of a very happy day. But we're going to move on to something slightly different now, because what we've got to picture, this is I take it, the village that the family takes its name from. Is it?
It is it indeed. You and I, well, in my view, 2 of my most favourite times was spent with yourself on your radio show, doing a programme about Calow and the chimney sweeps of Leicester.
That's right. It was a section we had every week called what was it called? Anyway, it was Memory Lane. Memory Lane.
That's right. So Calow Village, and it's very important in our family that it's said Calow, not Callow, and it has 1 L, is 2 miles to the east of Chesterfield in Derbyshire, Chesterfield with the crooked spire. And Calow families have only ever lived really, in Derbyshire, Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire from a long time back. And I have a spurious tree, which I think is very interesting because it goes back to 1086, from when the village was in the Domesday Book. There's David and me, and by this time it must be 1970s. We're still wearing the same clothes. And the other thing is our knobbly knees. My mother delights in showing photographs of our knobbly knees all the time. And that's Grandad Jack Calow. Grandad was one of the most important people in our lives. He was in the Royal Army Medical Corps in the Leicestershire Regiment in the trenches, and somehow managed to survive. And when Dave and I did Goodbye to All That by Robert Graves for our O-level, we could call on Grandad to give us firsthand what it was really like. And how on earth he survived, I have no idea. But without him being there, we aren't, are we? It's life.
Absolutely.
No, there he is, an amazing man. He knew so much and just would tell us about everything. And Dad was an office area sales manager, and he used to go around Derbyshire, all the counties, Midlands, and he would take us in the summer holidays, and we would go and visit places, and we went to Calow.
Well, you come from a long line of distinguished Calows, but probably in Leicester, Calows, the name Calow is probably most associated with sweets.
It is.
Certainly my wife, who is a Leicester lass, remembers Calow the sweets. I mean, not you have disgraced the family name by not going up chimneys. what can we see here at the moment?
Well, what you can see is a wonderful piece of history which Eric Calow, who was on the programme with us, if you remember, John.
He was,
yeah. The bottom card is my great-great-grandfather's calling card, William Calow, and that's from 1851, and he lived in Desford. The family came from Hinckley, and he was a sweet there. And the card above, William died in 1878, and that part of the company was taken over by Reuben and Walter Calow. Walter Calow is my great-grandfather. That's Jack Calow's dad, who you saw on the program previous. And that is a wonderful card because it alludes to what you say, John. It tells you that they are continuing their late father's work and to look out for people spuriously using their name, i.e. because there were so many other Calow chimney sweeps. Walter was one of, he had 6 boys and they all became chimney sweeps and all worked in Leicester and predominantly in the Highfields area.
Yeah.
The one that didn't was Reuben, who worked with Walton. He went to America in the early 1880s. And we've met the American Calows, and they still live in Michigan, in Battle Creek.
How extraordinary.
It is. It's remarkable.
Of course, chimney sweeps are few and far between these days because fewer people have coal fires these days. So it's one of those jobs that's, as it were, almost disappeared, really.
And yet, when I did some investigating, there's a lady who wrote a fascinating book about chimney sweeping in the 1800s and into the 1900s. And she said now there are many more chimney sweeps than there ever have been because people do have proper fires again.
Yes.
But no, it's a remarkable thing to have a rare name and one profession. It makes family history searching rather easy.
And of course, we don't push boys up chimneys anymore.
No,
was the pity, of course. When you weren't talking to your forebears, you and David were watching television, and I love this little composite picture.
Well,
because this takes me back as well.
I was going to say, if you're of a certain age, you will know exactly what this is.
Yeah.
Now, there's a deliberate use of this for the next piece of music or music we're going to hear and see. This is what children in 1964 would have been watching on the television generally, clearly in black and white, which is an interesting thing to note in a minute. And you got there the wooden tops. And having seen that again, I don't understand. I always think, all the men never wore any shirts. Bill and Ben, the flower pot men, and Weed in the centre. There was always a spooky house on the hill. And the best one there is lovely Andy Pandy and Teddy. And of course, his friend was called Looby Loo.
Looby Loo.
Looby Loo.
And Watch with Mother.
Yes, and the Watch with Mother.
What they actually did show something of the social aspects of the time.
Yeah.
Because if you remember, the Wooden Tops had a lady who came in and did for them called Mrs. Scrubbit.
Yeah, well, you can remember better than I can, John. The reason why we're showing this is that while this was on the television and children were watching it, unbeknown to us all, something had happened in a very low-level Slough industrial estate, where a genius had pulled together the most amazing people in the business to make something that would change children's television history forever. And the people that made these programs went on to really helm most of what happened then in the British film industry.
And so this was Jerry Adams, wasn't it?
Jerry Anderson here.
Jerry Anderson. Why did I say Jerry Anderson?
And we're seeing here the wonderful Barry Gray. Now, Barry Gray is the same as the doyen of these 50s English-like music composers. He worked a lot with Vera Lynn, but he was asked to score the music for these programs. Jerry started off with some quite trite children's stuff in the 50s, but by 60 and 61, he was really into the theme of space and with Supercar and Fireball. But with the two we're going to see now, because I think it's important that you see this and understand as a 4 and 5 year old, this is what really has formed how I was as a child. And as probably my wife would say, haven't changed since. Everything that I love is in this program. And you'll see what, let's have a watch of these now, see what happens.
The music of Barry Gray and accompanying Stingray and Thunderbirds. You know, watching that, two things occur to me, Rob. Firstly, it's in colour. It's not like in black and white. So immediately there's another dimension added. But also when we think of marionettes and puppets, we think of them performing, you know, just in front of a sort of a painted screen or something. And there are 3D sets there. So in both ways, it really does appeal to the imagination.
You've got to imagine how forward-thinking this all was. Derek Meddings, who did most of that amazing explosions and everything, went on to do Bond and Superman and things like that. It had the cream of these people who really, the cutting edge of the technology to see what we saw. And listen to Barry Gray's music. That's not children's program music. That is serious stuff. And it was perfect for that. And we mentioned, didn't we, John, before, if you watch Wallace and Gromit, then there's some wonderful homage to Thunderbirds and all the Jerry Anderson in that, of how his gizmos work and everything. It's fantastic.
Well, Wallace and Gromit are a sort of a descendant of this, but in its way, equally wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. It was, that is just, and the 60s was made of that. That has to be and cover all the TV music that I can. I mean, the cult TV of the Saint, the Avengers, the Real Avengers, Randall and Hopkirk, the Champions. This was what the 60s was about. These amazing programs.
And of course, there was all this marketing that was going on as well. We can see some of the things that you could buy that accompanied the series.
It is. And I think Korg and Dinky weren't daft. They got in with Jerry Anderson very early on to market these amazing craft that kids could play with them. And of course, it's not surprising that they're worth a lot of money if you still got them in their box. We haven't.
But you've got lots of the models still.
Sadly, there's probably too much Jerry Anderson in both our houses, in the lofts.
Well, it was wonderful remaking our acquaintance with those wonderful programs. Let's move on a little bit now, if we may, because, well, here's an interesting picture. Tell us about what we can see here.
Well, I said that Dad made kits with us when we were growing up. That's a wonderful photograph, and it must be about 1945 to show that Uncle John Robert Bilson Calow on the left, and Alwyn Warwick Calow, my dad, on the right, were both in the RAF. Uncle John was in the RAF in the war, and Dad afterwards, he went to India and drove lorries. But Uncle John was a boffin, because he worked on radar. In particular, they were seconded to the RAF bases to work on the radar on Lancaster bombers. Fascinating to talk to. But he went to work for Shell after the war. And he actually did live in Texas. So he's like Uncle J.R. Calow, not J.R. Ewing. But no, Dad obviously had a love for aircraft. If he told us a story. He went up in a horse glider from Stoughton Aerodrome and it crashed, and they were very lucky to get out. But there are things like that, you know, when that's in the blood, then you make airfix kits with your children in the 60s, and it was wonderful.
Well, we'll come on to you and David's fascination with aircraft perhaps a little bit later on, but it's been inherited by you two, hasn't it?
It has, definitely. And so the next intro slide moves us to September 1969 and going to the Queen Street Odeon in Leicester, when it was one huge cinema. On September the 15th, 1969, it's Battle of Britain Day. This film, Battle of Britain, was launched in London. And Dave and I know every word and every scene of this film back to front. When you're a 9-year-old watching this amazing film in the cinema, and there's just this huge screen, and you've got real Spitfires, real Hurricanes, real Messerschmitts and Heinkels flying, no computer generation, everything is real that you see. This film kick-started aviation history because it had something like the 14th biggest air force in existence for a film. They got so many aircraft together. And
the person we can see wielding the baton in the picture is Ron Goodwin, who wrote most of the music for the film.
He did indeed. There is a story which we could spend a long time talking about, why William Walton wrote part of the score, but only a short part was used. But Ronnie Goodwin did the main action sequences because, of course, he was the perfect person. He'd done Where Eagles Dare, he'd done 633 Squadron, and the Miss Marple films, and he was, like Barry Gray, one of the doyens of British light music.
And really, that takes you on to another one of your enthusiasms, which is film music.
It is, that's right. So sadly, this has to encompass all of John Barry's music, all of John Williams' music. Dave and I were very lucky. We have actually seen Ronnie Goodwin, John Barry, and John Williams conduct live. And that's wonderful. It's like seeing Mozart, isn't it? When you see John Williams conducting Star Wars.
I don't know about whether you will agree with this, but I think I'm rather sad that some film music these days is just layered on from beginning to end. And the great thing about these old films was that when film music played, it was a signal that something was really going to happen. And then, I mean, if you take the Bond films, in the early Bond films, once the Bond theme started, you know that something was you knew something really exciting was going to happen.
The great thing
there were long stretches where there was no music at all.
No, John Barry was as much a genius as Ron Goodwin or John Williams, in that he knew when to put the music in, and when not to. And they all in a film, it is as the part where there's no music is as important.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but I think we're going to hear a bit of Ron Goodwin's music for the Battle of Britain.
It's the finale to the film, but I wanted to showcase the other person in my life, shall we say, my twin brother David, and because he's conducting on this performance the Bardi Wind Orchestra.
Let's hear it. Music from that great film, Battle of Britain, and that was the Bardi Wind Orchestra conducted by David Calow. And Rob, we ought to say, I suppose, not that he probably needs saying because everyone will know it, but the Wind Orchestra is a kind of an offshoot of the Symphony Orchestra.
It is. It was formed in 1992 by David and myself because we'd seen when we performed the two big Mahler symphonies we did that so many of us were in that who'd played together in the School of Music band. Wouldn't it be a good idea? I remember Andrew Constantine looking rather quizzically at me to say, oh, go on then. And here we are all these years later. And of course, for Christmas, you are as big a part of the Bardi Wind as anybody.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I will say that Christmas concert, that annual Christmas concert, is always, for me, the time when Christmas really gets going, because I look forward to it every year.
It's for a lot of people. Yeah. It's worth pointing out two things after this film. That photograph is wonderful. It shows you Susanna York once the Heinkels have blown up the RAF base, and it shows you, as you just said, John, how film music was recorded in the 1960s. Here's Ronnie and the orchestra and the film. why that's important is that there's a person playing trumpet on that picture. It's the late Don Blakeson. Don conducted David and me in the 78, 79 in the Symphonic Wind Band. And once David and I found out he had played on the soundtrack of that, then, but as he said, and I think you can imagine, all the chaps in there weren't looking at Ronnie, they were looking at the Spitfires and the Hurricanes and everything on this amazing screen behind them. And that was fascinating, talking to Don about that, about how the film was recorded with Ronnie. And that was a wonderful picture to find of the orchestra doing it.
And how frustrating it must be for the orchestra who want to turn around to look at what's going on the screen,
yes,
rather than looking at the conductor.
Yes, there we go. Now, it's worth saying, if we look at the next picture.
I was going to say, yes.
Having said that we went to Gateway Boys because it was the art grammar school, the reason is because, yes, music was all around us, but David and I have a God-given talent for art, but we don't get it out of anywhere. Dad drew and did all sorts of things like that, artisan. Jack Calow painted every day of his life up to 99, 100. He was 102 when he passed away. So when you're surrounded by art, we found ourselves that it was the natural thing that came to us. We love music, we love playing the instruments, but the art is the natural talent that we have. And so through the art grammar school, it was no surprise that we went off to do art college, which we'll talk about in a second. But what we have done, I joined it first, but just before David, we joined the Guild of Aviation Artists, which is the premier art society for aviation art in the world. And there are only 65 full members, and David and I are very privileged to be two of them. And it's a wonderful to be, and that's at the Mal Galleries in London, which we exhibit every year.
I can remember you telling me once that you have to be a bit careful about painting aeroplanes, because there are certain geeks who will approach you and say, you've only included 6 rivets on that part of the plane. In fact, there were 7. You got that wrong.
You have to be really, really careful, particularly if you're doing a view which is a historical document. It's a particular view of something that happened. You have to be very careful that it's accurate, because you bet your bottom dollar somebody will tell you in that exhibition it's wrong.
And there's a good market for these kind of pictures then?
There's a market there's a market for horse painting and dogs, as well as boats. There's a marine artist guild,
steam trains.
There's a guild of railway artists as well. So there's a market for that. Through this, certainly David would admit, we have met the most amazing old flyers from the war who flew Spitfires and Hurricanes. Some fantastic people, and then the artists, particularly somebody like Roy Cross, who painted all the Airfix boxes, and Roy Huxley, who painted the Matchbox kits. And to meet them, I would have never dreamt that I'd ever meet the guys that painted the picture on the Airfix boxes that I made in the kits in the 60s.
Well, it's a lovely picture, and it reminds us of another string to your bow.
Well, there we go.
This is a painting of a very different kind that we can see now.
And
we're now behind this.
Yeah, well, we're now in the 1970s at Gateway, and this is the art department. By this time, everybody was painting like this. This is by Roger Dean. It's called Pathways, and it's an album cover for a progressive rock album by Yes. Now, I'm going to say something straight away about this. If you want to talk about this in amazing detail, do not come to me. Either talk to Alan Hames or Steve Hall. Steve and I have been to several concerts by a person who played in Yes several times, which is the keyboard player Rick Wakeman. And in the 1974, he'd done several things, particularly one just before about King Henry VIII and his wives. But he left Yes to do 2 spectacular albums with full symphony orchestra. And the first one was Journey to the Center of the Earth, which had a full orchestra, big choir, a rock band, and was narrated by David Hemmings. And the next one was the Myths and Legends of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, again, with the same sort of forces. And in 1974, to find something like this with a full symphony orchestra, mixing these genres, it's spectacular. It really is completely over the top. If you don't know Rick Wakeman, he had very long blonde hair and a gold cape.
I once interviewed him, and he'd just come into the studio from rehearsal at De Montfort, and he was clearly brimming over
Amazing.
Pleasure. And I just said, "You look very happy." And he said, "Well," he said, "I asked him if I could play the organ, and they opened it for me."
Yeah.
And he just loved playing that organ, you know. But he was classically trained. I mean, he was a musician.
Yeah. So this is a 14-year-old. Amazing. I mean, prog rock, but it's because it's got a full symphony orchestra, choir. It's just so gloriously over the top. So this is the beginning to Journey of the Centre of the Earth.
Let's hear this then. Journey to the Centre of the Earth. Rick Wakeman. Everything but the kitchen sink and a heavenly choir.
Well, he didn't do it by heart. That is live. That the album you get is the live recording on the 18th of January 1974 with the London Symphony Orchestra and the English Chamber Choir. So no holds barred. This is an completely over the top experience.
You know, it strikes me that you've got an amazingly Catholic taste in music.
Well, it's what affects you as you grow up. Now, the wonderful story here is that, and I've mentioned Steve Hall and myself, we've been to see Mr. Grumpy, as he's called several times at De Montfort or wherever, where he's normally with a piano, a candelabra, and he's such a raconteur, amazing guy. This picture has my son on it. Now, this is really interesting. And fate, how could you imagine that a 14-year-old in 1974 could be listening to that music? And 40 years later, Steve Hall and myself went to the Albert Hall to see Journey to the Centre of the Earth live, UK tour, and my son's playing tuba in the orchestra.
Isn't that wonderful?
Staggering. And there he is with the man in his cape. And that's some of the brass section there. And it was really funny. I said to him, Rick Wakeman has found the music again. He'd lost the music. He's re-recorded it. You must listen to this. It really affected me when I was 14. Oh, yeah, fine. And then a few weeks later, he rang and said, I've got the gig. I'm playing with the Rhine Orchestra in the tour. Amazing. It was such an evening, though. Steve amazingly got the tickets to the Albert Hall. I don't know how he did it. And the big Roger Dean pictures. It was a fantastic evening.
What a wonderful place to have it in as well, the Albert Hall. It could have been built for it, couldn't it, really?
Amazing.
We're going to move on a few years now to 1984.
Well, that's right. So what happened? There's the chaps with their mortarboards.
A fetching couple again.
Yes. There's a bit of explanation needs to happen here. You do your A-level art at Gateway Grammar School, but it was a sixth form college by the end and had ladies there and all sorts. And then you decide what you want to do as a career. So if you wanted to do art and design, at that point in 1979, you went to do a foundation course in art and design, and you stayed within the county you were in. You didn't go out anywhere else. And hence we had a choice of Leicester Polytechnic or Loughborough College of Art and Design, which was wonderful. So both of us went there. That isn't surprising as such, because you had to go within Leicestershire and we thought it was a better one. There is no excuse, though, other than why did we both want to go to Leeds Polytechnic to do the graphic design degree course? And of course, David comes before Robert. So I always get the inquisitive, why do you want to go as well as your brother? But anyway, we have always done different arts. It's never been the same. We were the first twins on the course. And if you live in Leicester, we were used to the Halle Orchestra coming to De Montfort, but to go to Leeds into that town hall, and the first concert you see is the Concertgebouw Haitink opening the Leeds Festival, and through the 3 years you could see Janet Baker. Everybody came. It was the most amazing thing. We both had our proper first professional lessons from the people involved in the music scene. We were so lucky that the College of Music could do night school classes, so we were in the band and orchestra of that. And then Leeds Polytechnic even had a wind band, and it's got a lot to answer for, because on 2 consecutive years we both met our wives at Leeds Polytechnic wind band. So Leeds has a lot to answer for in our family. They were doing dietetics, we were doing the graphics.
A fine city, Leeds.
It was really wonderful.
Is.
It is.
Again, I think everyone's graduation pictures look like that.
Well, yes, quite.
Being slightly embarrassed.
What it also was the music that you got and were experiencing. The first one was Nielsen Symphonies. there was a lady who played oboe in the wind band, and she said, "You've got to listen to Nielsen's symphonies." And I'm so glad the Bardi under Klaus has premiered two of these in Leicester. They're just fantastic pieces of music, and I think the Bardi has done them huge justice in performing them. That was the first one. The other was Respighi and the Pines of Rome and the Fountains of Rome. And you've always said, John, haven't you, that the Bardi Wind Orchestra's loudest piece ever is the end of the Pines of Rome.
My ears are still ringing.
Yes, and we must do that at some point with the Bardi. But the other composer was Paul Hindemith.
Yeah, this is another of your enthusiasm.
It is. There's something about Paul Hindemith's music. He wrote a lot of music. He wrote sonatas for most instruments and some weird ones as well. But he holds a pivotal position in 1934, clearly, in history of European music, because he wrote Mattis de Mahler, the opera, which was the artist against the state. And because of that, the Nazis threw him out of Germany. But he was trying to make a point, and then ended up in the end in the 1940s in America at Yale. And he wrote some terrific pieces of music, and it's often seen as dry, modern, baroque, whatever. You should get into Hindemith. There are some really good pieces. This is my favorite piece of music by him, and it's probably his most famous piece. It's his take on 4 Weber piano pieces. But what we end up with the symphonic metamorphosis on themes by Weber, is one of the greatest showpieces for orchestra ever written. And I think the Bardi should definitely play this. It's a fantastic piece of music. We're going to hear the end of it, which is the end of the march, the 4th movement.
Let's hear from Hindemith now, then.
It had to be live. That is a fantastic performance by the New York Phil. And I think American orchestras really know how to play Hindemith's music for the brass writing. The tune there at the end is a real earworm. Da, 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 da. And once you've heard it, you just can't get it out of your head. And it's a proper piece of Weber. That is a fantastic showpiece, and we should do it at some point.
He's one of those composers who's, start again, he was one of those composers who is fairly frequently recorded, but you hear him less in the concert hall.
No. But I can say, having just seen the proms this year, the Mattis Symphony and that piece are in the proms for the first time for ages.
Well, we must make a note to see that or hear it. Yes. Now, we've got a very interesting image coming up now. Now, Porter Cabin, what's this to do with you, dear boy?
Well, what happened is at the end of your degree course in those days, in 1983, prospective employers would come to see your degree show. And if they like your work and having chatted to you, they would employ you to go and work in their graphic design studios and the like. And these next 2 years, from September 85 to September 83 to 85, were the only 2 years that Dave and I have been apart. Because I got a job in York, because we were in Leeds, as you say, for the Shepherd Building Group, but particularly Porter Cabin. And so, John, I can tell you everything you want to know about Portaloos.
Well, that will be very useful at some point, but not perhaps now.
No. And
this is one of your illustrations.
It is. This is one of my visual illustrations I did for Porter Cabin, because I was in the marketing department as a junior graphic designer. And at that point, you have to understand that the Apple Mac didn't exist. So there's no computers in graphics at all. It's all done by hand still. And so I would do these visuals to show an idea for an advert and the like. And there was always an in-joke. So we deliberately put this rather scantily clad woman coming out of the Portaloo.
If you crane forward and look carefully to the right, you will see that image and a young lady emerging therefrom.
Emerging from a Portaloo. And the whole point was that this had to be put before the managing director. So it was an in-joke from the marketing department, but it was a fantastic 2 years to learn what you have to do in graphics. Then I was very, very lucky, because then where David had went to, which is Jerry Ball and Associates in Leicester on the New Walk, 2 vacancies came up, and I was asked to join the company. And I must thank Jerry Ball, because he took a big, I suppose he looked at the 2 of us, but he always kept us separate. David did visualizing and design. I always did illustration. And we worked together from 1985 there to 2006. It was a wonderful time on the New Wall.
It strikes me, there is a connection between that image we can see now, porter cabins, and your work with aircraft, is that both of them have got to be absolutely accurate. They've got to be a completely accurate rendition of whatever the subject is. It's not, in a sense, an imaginative or surreal picture of porter cabins. This is what they're like.
Yes, the different units. And Dave and I did think about being architects, and we still do a lot of architectural drawing to do with that. So we get back to Leicester now in 1985.
Well, it's nice that you know so much about Portaloos, and I may well come to you on that matter. But we move on to something very different now. This is a picture of the gardens. Next door to the Bardi Hall.
And that wonderful evening before mayhem happened in August 2019 in De Montfort Gardens. What a fantastic concert that was. Why I'm showing that, though, that's a picture of that concert, which was made up only of film and musicals music.
Yes.
When I came back to Leicester in 1985, I was really thrown in the deep end, immediately playing for Leicester Symphony, Charnwood, Brooklyn Sinfonia, all the orchestras, Leicester Opera, OPs, Ashleyan in the Pit, and then really busy playing amateur music in Leicester, invited so much music around. But also from 1995, David became the MD of the Idols, which is the Infirmary Dramatic Opera Society. And those 10 years were wonderful because I got to play in the pit. I had to learn the tenor saxophone for a start. And we did not only the standards, which would be South Pacific, King and I, but also things like Mac and Mabel, Anything Goes. Wonderful shows, wonderful shows. And this goes back, I suppose, to Diro Mantovani playing music from shows and things like that as well. It's always been a huge part of the genre of music I like. And if it was musicals, then what could it be? Les Miserables, what a fantastic show that is. And there's so many wonderful. The Rodgers and Hammerstein concert that the Bardi did was one of the most amazing, popular things we've ever done. But I always come back to Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Yes.
I think his gift for melody, and he gets it from his father, William Lloyd Webber, a favourite composer of David and myself. And we always try and include some of his music in our little trios we do with Marguerite Beatson. And I come back to Phantom because it's easily my favourite. I've seen it 4 times, twice in London and elsewhere. But actually, we're going to listen to the big number from the sequel. And the problem with Love Never Dies is that it exists now in 2 versions because it wasn't that a bigger success the first time. But I still think the music, he was clearly inspired by this theme in both these shows. And this is the big tune, Till I Hear You Sing, in the version, a shorter version, it'll help us time-wise, from the second act. It's wonderful, and it's sung by Raymond Karimloo, the new generation of Phantoms.
The music of Andrew Lloyd Webber. Music from Andrew Lloyd Webber's Love Never Dies, which in a way stands for your love of music theatre, Rolf.
Yeah, it's sumptuously scored, and it leads to what we're going to talk about in a moment, Puccini, because I think that the melodic line, Lloyd Webber knows how to write a good tune, but it's orchestrated beautifully. And the power in that music, it's fantastic. That's a lovely.
And that's the Bardi we can see playing.
That's right. Yes, this is the Bardi playing the Phantom of the Opera on that night in the park, and they did a brilliant job behind us on the digital screen that matched the music we were playing. So there's all the candles from the Phantoms there. That is wonderful music, and it leads to the next piece because I think, we know that Lloyd Webber, his passion for Puccini. And if I like Wagner, I also love Puccini. We
all just say that what we're going to hear is a piece from his last opera, his last unfinished opera, Turandot.
It is.
The unfinished nature is really why you've chosen this, because there's a big story behind it.
There is a big story, and we'll be here 3 hours later if I don't curtail this. This is one of the biggest scandals still of musical history that's never been solved. Sadly, Puccini died in 1924 in November of throat cancer. That's fine. And sadly, composers have always died, leaving works unfinished, Mozart in particular, of course. But this, he left 36 pages of very undecipherable notes. But he did leave two things. He wanted it to end with Nessun Dorma, because he knew a good tune. He'd written Nessun Dorma in Turandot, and wow, that's a big tune if ever there was one. So the opera should end with that. And that the two soloists, Turandot, the soprano, and Calow, the prince, who by this time have fallen in love, should soar like meteors over the crowd, singing top Cs. Well, if you listen to the end of Turandot, that doesn't happen. You hear Nessun Dorma in a very boring, perfunctory version, and you don't hear them sing a word. They don't sing a note. And in 1990, we all got to know about Nessun Dorma, the Football World Cup on the BBC, but also a revolutionary recording came out by Josephine Barstow of the real ending of Turandot that was written by the composer Franco Alfano there with the big glasses. The piece of music we saw beforehand was the end. You can see it there. That's his own handwriting, the end of the opera, dated January 1926, which proves he wrote that music. You never hear it. Toscanini, who conducted the first performance and only ever conducted one performance of it, stopped where Puccini's music stopped and walked off the stage, saying this is where the composer died. He never conducted it again. And what happened after that was a very much bastardized version at the hand of Toscanini. So poor Alfano, his reputation was ruined by the fact that ever he listened to this piece of music, which was completely disjointed and made no sense. About 100 parts were cut out. And since 1990, I've done so much investigating to find out where and what happened. I was even asked to do a talk with the Leicester Music Society about this. So what we're going to hear, and I guarantee none of you, unless you're a Calow and Noma, have heard this music before. It's very rarely done. It exists in print now for the first time. It didn't before. We did it in 1993 in Leicester for Leicester Opera. We premiered it in the East Midlands. We're going to hear the proper end of Turandot as envisaged by Franco Alfano, and you hear the two soloists singing the top Cs at the end that Puccini wanted. It's wonderful music.
And we have the voice, the wonderful voice of Josephine Barstow. Well, that was the end of Turandot by Puccini, as it ought to be heard.
As it ought to be done.
And he is such a great composer. It's very interesting. I remember Benjamin Britten, who didn't like Puccini's music, but he said he's a great dramatist. And one of the things Britten said about Puccini, because he'd seen his operas, he said he knows exactly how long it takes someone to walk across the stage.
Yeah.
And he gives him the time, or her the time, and the music to do that. So he wasn't just thinking in terms of music, he was thinking in terms all the time of the stage picture and the pace at which the story should unfold.
And there are a multitude of these wonderful sequences in all his operas. I mean, I've played Bohème and the Trittico, the three, and of course Turandot when we did it with Leicester Opera. It's wonderful music, wonderful. Yeah. That's the Bardi in a Pit. I thought that was apt to show for an opera. That was when we do our ballet concerts, and that's when they make us into a pit.
Very good. The Bardi in the Pit doesn't sound very nice, but it's now we're sort of moving to our final selection, Rob.
Well, the last piece. Yeah, sorry, go on.
This is another of your enthusiasms, another of your great favourites, and this is Elgar.
It is. Well, there's a composer missing so far, and also a symphony orchestra. The composer is Sir Edward Elgar, and if I paid to be in a composer society in the Elgar one, we need his music, but we do. Elgar was a genius. There's no doubt about that, and I think he's our greatest composer. He was like Mozart. He wasn't taught it, it was there. He never went to music college. He was the humble son of a piano repair in Worcester. How on earth did he write this music? Which he did. And all his contemporaries with him, Parry, Sullivan, they'd all gone to music college. He didn't at all. and yet the standard of the works that we do, and that is the first concert in the 30th anniversary season of the Bardi, and that's the orchestra that, of course, has been missing all evening, the Bardi Symphony Orchestra. I first played with the Bardi in March 1988, and if somebody had told me what experience I have lived through since then with this amazing orchestra and the two fantastic conductors and all the players and friends I've made and the places that you and I have been to, John, with this amazing orchestra, you couldn't believe it. I wouldn't have believed it at all. And the concert in March in the museum, no, it was in the Fraser Noble. The fact we could go to Russia, Prague, with Andrew, and then Klaus has come on. I mean, I still say to Klaus, what on earth did he think the Bardi was like to come and play with us in Bedworth Civic Hall? And here he is, he's still with us, so we must hurrah, we must be doing something right. So
this is the Bardi Symphony. This is the Bardi playing the Elgar Symphony No. 1. There he is. Just you saying that he was self-taught.
Yes.
Where did it all come from? One of the things that always strikes me is Mrs. Elgar. She saw genius in that man when no one else did, and that's a great, extraordinary talent. It seems.
Alice Roberts married Elgar and then gave away her inheritance.
Yeah. Because
she knew.
That's right.
He was a genius.
He was a genius.
And there's some wonderful stories. They were so poor in London when he first tried, she would write out his musical stage.
Yeah.
They had to write out the stage. She did it every night for him.
She absolutely believed in him. And I wonder whether he would have just given up if it hadn't been for her.
I'm sure. No, she was the backbone to everything he did.
So we've got a lot to be thankful for. Well, there is the man himself.
There is the man himself.
Who looked like a kind of major general, but the music showed there was this extraordinary romantic man inside him.
Yes. With melancholy as well.
Melancholy as well. Now we've got a real treat now, and I'll let you introduce it, Rob.
Well, I wanted to do something special to end. If you've got Elgar and the Bardi, then let's hear the orchestra playing some Elgar. But then Alan reminded me about something, so why don't we watch the Bardi playing Elgar? But there's something special about this. This was one of the last things we did before we were all plunged into this nightmare of the last 18 months, well, 15 months, whatever it is. This is from February the 15th last year, when we had a fantastic workshop day in Holy Trinity Church. And we looked at the music at 10 o'clock, and then at 3:30 or whatever it was, we performed the first symphony, all of it. And I think it was just a wonderful day to show what the orchestra was about, that we could do that under Klaus's guidance, to pull it off in some a small audience. So we're looking at the very end of this symphony. And I think we need to remember, I love his words here, Elgar. This symphony came out in 1908, and he saw it as a massive hope for the future. And let's hope that here we are playing this wonderful music, and we should be hopefully doing it again in May. It's Elgar, the end of the first symphony. And if you can see yourself playing, well, it's just white heat music, white heat conducting. Sit back and watch a fantastic performance.
Just sit back and let this wash over you, absorb this wonderful experience. Here we go.
Wow.
What can you say? It just brings a lump to the throat, doesn't it?
Just miraculous, wonderful music making, and let's hope that we can get back to do things like that as soon as we can. Wasn't it wonderful?
Absolutely superb. Stay with us, please, Rob, because although that's the last piece of music, and there is the symphony.
I'd just like to add one thing, that of course, other than the gang of four who organised all this, we did show it to Klaus, because I wanted to show it to Klaus and say, I hope you're happy to do this. Of course he was, because it's just a wonderful thing to show. But we wanted it to be a surprise, didn't we, for the end of the evening?
We did. And
it was
absolutely great. Well, as I say, stay with us if you will, please. This is really at the end of the question. I'm questioning Roberts anyway, but now it's your chance to put some questions to him. In the meantime, let me just ask one question to get things started. Now, in a sense, Rob, you've said that Elgar said he wrote the symphony with a massive hope for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've got hope for the future now, or at least some hope for the future as we come out of COVID with any luck. Have we got any plans for the Bardi this year?
I think what has been really gratifying is we've had huge support from the players of our efforts to try and get together through all of this. We've last played in Montmartre on March the 15th, a terrific family concert. And then we said, right, well, as soon as we know we can try and get ahead within the guidance, and everything we tried, we were thwarted until October the 3rd, when we had a wonderful day split in things, but then thwarted again. Other things happened. Poor Bardi win Christmas couldn't happen, John, could it? And then hopefully we tried in the spring, so hopefully the next thing is that we can try and get the wind and brass together in one session and the strings on July the 10th. That is looking very hopeful. And of course, fingers crossed, we're absolutely touching everything that we can get Klaus over to do that with us. And we definitely need that.
Well, that's great to hear, and fingers crossed. We have got some questions, I understand. Oh, hello, we've got Michael. Hello, Michael. Can you hear us, Michael?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello, ask your question, please.
Well, the only thing I wanted to say was once, many years ago, when trying to get a job as a senior registrar in surgery, I went down to Exeter and met one of the consultants in the surgeon's room. And he said, you've sent an application, you're keen on music. What are your 8 gramophone records? That threw me back absolutely tremendously. And I put it to you, that's the most wonderful thing if you're interviewing somebody, to ask whether it's true that they're interested in music or not. I mean, I managed a perfectly reasonable answer in the end, but I always remember that. And when Robert said that about the 8 gramophone records, I immediately thought of that.
Well, I think everybody should try it. It's incredibly difficult to pick 8 pieces of music. It really is difficult, and you're missing so much out. But I hope everybody's enjoyed my mixture of as much as with Adams and of course with Klaus before me. Thank
Michael, thank you so much for getting in touch. It's nice to see you and have you along. We've got, I think, Brian wants to ask a question. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Brian, do ask a question.
Do I show your face?
Yes, indeed, yes. Hello, Robert.
Good evening, Brian. How are you? Thank you for coming on board. Nice to hear you.
Well, I've got a lot of technical advice here to make sure I press the right buttons and things.
We can hear you.
Enjoyed your music, and I was very interested to hear that you made model aeroplanes and you like steam trains.
Yes.
Well, I was doing that at least 20 years before you were doing that. And I always remember, I'll ask you a question in a minute. I always remember making a model of a Bolton Paul Defiant.
Yes, wonderful.
Which was a bit of a Lulu of a design, as it turned out. And this was in 1943, when you couldn't get paints and things like that. No, and I always remembered finding some paint and thinning it down with oil and painting this aeroplane. It was quite a big one. And I rushed home from school every day, hoping it would dry. But it never ever did dry. And I thought that was it was a part of my life. Model aeroplanes, yes. Steam trains, yes. I collected lots and lots of train numbers. Was it Allen's book of train numbers?
Oh, it would be Ian Allen's, definitely.
Ian Allen, yeah.
Anyhow, what I was going to ask you, about 2 years ago, I was having lunch with a chef, in actual fact, and we both had exactly the same meal, right? And I thoroughly enjoyed the meal. I'm no cook or anything like that, but I thoroughly enjoyed that meal. But he analysed everything on that plate. Now, I'm wondering whether professional musicians do the same to music. Do they analyse every little bit of it, or do they take in the full emotion of the thing?
That is a really interesting question, because you should sit me and my son next to each other. You have a professional musician and an amateur. And I'm not quite, do they get jaded professionals? They just sit there and play brilliantly, but are they getting the same out of it that an amateur is, who's doing it with a love because they want to do it? And you're thinking, you know, I've sat in the orchestra playing a Mahler symphony thinking, well, this is just heaven. It's just, how can 100 people play this together? It's remarkable. And then if you talk to a professional who plays Mahler X times a year, it's not going to be the same, or is it? And that's a really interesting question you've asked. It really is.
Can I just say something there? Because I'm also doing pre-concerts the Philharmonic Orchestra. And when you go up afterwards, if it's been a really great performance, they're buzzing. Mm-hmm. They're not the professionals who've seen it all before. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, you know, a performance takes off. No one can quite understand it. Everything comes together and they play their hearts out. And it can happen with, in inverted commas, jaded musicians as well. Probably not every time, but if they've got a conductor who can somehow transmit this magic, then it can happen to any orchestra.
I think that's a big part of it, the conductor, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Very nice to see you. I can't see any more people on the screen wanting to ask a question, Robert, so I think we're going to have to draw it to a halt.
Well, there we go.
But I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed for a quite wonderful, illuminating conversation. It's been lovely to hear from you about your life and times, your love of music, and indeed the musical choices that you've made that have been so, as it were, illuminating. Next time, that's next month's guest, will be Jane Hanson, who is the Bardi chair. And there she is. And I'm looking forward very much indeed to talking to her next time. This will be next month. I'd also like to thank very much indeed the technical team behind this evening's conversation, because these things don't just come together by accident. So Alan, David and Robert, once again, thank you very much indeed. I should say also that a video of this evening's conversation will be up in the near future on the Bardi website. There's the address, if you didn't know it, www.bardi.org.uk. So really, until next time, when we shall be talking to Jane, it's goodbye from me, it's goodbye from Robert, goodbye from all of us. Thanks for attending, and do join us for the next Bardi interview. Good night.
Right.